Every game in the Pathologic series tells the story of a person in a plague-ridden town. If that person is the horror specs, a self-taught surgeon who relies on intuition, a scalpel, and his knowledge of the step, you get Pathologic 2, a survival-focused game where a doctor literally plunges his hands into human flesh. But if our protagonist is Daniil Dankovsky, a renowned medical scholar, an observer, and an analyst, someone who only resorts to laboratory research in the most exceptional cases, then the story takes a different turn, and the gameplay must change accordingly. Today, we got the next update in the Pathologic 3 saga. Ice Pick Lodge, the developer of the upcoming sequel / continuation / remaster / reimagining of the Pathologic franchise, gave us a behind-the-curtains look at what's been going on with the development of Dr. Dankovsky's route. One quick thing that I want to cover before we dive in, and it's something that I need to acknowledge, is that the face of IPL, Nikolai Dabowski, which, transparency, could have said that wrong, is in the middle of an ongoing investigation regarding some really heavy allegations. Everyone will have a different opinion on it, and I trust that you, as a viewer and a consumer, will make an informed decision about the game that you feel is best. I cannot tell you how to feel, but I am working on a video that lays everything out that we know so far, so we can have it all on the table. My personal opinion, which again may differ from yours, is that I will continue to support and be excited about this game, to support the many employees that have spent blood, sweat, and tears working on this franchise. I hope we get some clarification soon from IPL on the status of this investigation. That being said, oftentimes news like this can take months to get through the proper channels, so I would not expect it anytime soon, and despite it, I am really happy to see the Pathologic 3 is still getting worked on. But anyways, now that that is out of the way, let's get into what this video will be. In this video, I'm going to break up the devlog and go through the 3 main components that I believe the devlog is trying to highlight. The first one being the differences between Pathologic 2 and Pathologic 3, the hospital mechanics, which is obviously a huge part of the devlog, and then how the hospital mechanics and Daniil's own pursuit of a vaccine will affect the people of the town and vice versa. There is one more portion of the video that I'll be discussing, which is about the last minute of footage we get out of the devlog. I don't know about you guys, that last minute felt very goofy to me. And I think it's meant to highlight a lot of the narrative elements of Daniil's story. And I'll talk about that once we get there. But that will be the last portion of the video. And then we'll wrap up with my thoughts. Oh, and as a forewarning, there are several tinfoil hat theories throughout this video. So bear with me on those. But if you do enjoy this video, I have several other videos documenting updates on Pathologic 3 and my theories along with them. So the playlist for those videos will be in the description below. To start, Pathologic 3's second devlog is titled Do No Harm. Do No Harm is definitely a part of the Hippocratic Oath. Wrong. This is wrong. This is Cops from the Future. I'm editing this right now and trying desperately to get it out because this went way longer than I meant it to be. And I was looking up just a Google snippet of the Hippocratic Oath to put at this point in the video. And according to Harvard Health, do no harm is not a part of the Hippocratic Oath. It is from Hippocrates. Hippocrates? Yes. It is from one of his other works called Of the Epidemics, which is almost better, of the epidemics, because, clearly there's a bit of a plague situation going on in this game. This is what Harvard Health has to say about it, and, I'm just going to go with what Harvard Health thinks. The pledger commits to avoiding harm, yes, but there's nothing about making it a top priority. Meanwhile, Of the Epidemics says, the physician must be able to tell the antecedents, know the present, and foretell the future, must mediate these things, and have 2 special objects in view with regard to disease, namely, to do good or to do no harm. That is so insane that it mentions foretelling the future in a game with time travel. I don't know if IPL meant this, because I was like, yeah, that sounds like it's part of the Hippocratic Oath. That makes sense. I do think Dr. Dankovsky does attempt to not do harm, though, throughout this game and throughout this series. So I think the points I will be making later still stand, and I'll try to edit out the clear, incorrect statements where do no harm's part of the Hippocratic Oath. It's not, apparently. My bad. But a lot of the points I'm making about his character still stand, and I think they're actually still supported by some other things later in the video. But in case you didn't know, first, do no harm is not a part of the Hippocratic Oath. It's a part of another pledge that Hippocrates came up with called Of the Epidemics, because we're in an epidemic. Because it's the sand plague. Anyways, and I think this is so cool, obviously because Dr. Dankovsky here is a doctor and medical scholar, but I do think it relates a lot to his arc around his interactions with the townsfolk and vice versa. So I'm gonna hold on to those, but just keep that little nugget in the back of your brain. The devlog is divided into two portions, video and text. They both follow a pretty similar script other than some lore dumping at the end of the video portion, which we will watch once we get there. The first bit of the devlog is titled, "You Are Not a Butcher." I've said this in almost every video on Pathologic 3 that I've ever made, but the Bachelor route will be enormously different than the horror specs route of Pathologic 2. In the beginning of the video, we are told a brief bit about Pathologic 2 and how Pathologic 3 will differ from that. This has always been IPL's intentions, going back to a teletype post from 2022. I fundamentally did not want to make a clone of an existing game where the core gameplay of the horror specs would migrate with the individual characteristics of the hero, and most importantly, his former shortcomings. I think it's really cool that they have outright stated this, as a lot of fans questioned why the change in gameplay was happening. It's happening because these are two very different characters with very different narrative arcs and very different tools at their disposal. One thing the devlog does highlight, which I find extremely relevant, is Dr. Dankovsky's battle against death. We see various phrases pop up on screen that describe his attitude towards death, which will be relevant for some narrative themes we'll discuss later on. This first part is realistically just differentiating the two games, which I think is really helpful for newer fans to the franchise. One thing they highlight is that Pathologic 3 will be an entirely different game, and they start showing some highlights of these differences, one in which is the hospital sequences. You'll see later on that this is one of the main points of the devlog, to highlight the hospital gameplay. I find this super amusing because I feel so much of Daniel's story is highlighted throughout this devlog video, and none of it, I feel, directly ties into the hospital gameplay. IPL do be hitting us with the old plague and switch, if you will. If you unsubscribe after that, I understand. Anyways, the main focus of the middle portion of the devlog is the hospital sequences, and this is the meat and bones of the video. We've known the hospital will be a major set piece, as they advertised this on VK back in 2023. But today they officially announced that the patients will lie to you, and investigating their homes and lives will be a major function of the game. They might have mentioned this at some point in either the Steam descriptions or I'm not sure where, but I do know that they announced that the patients will lie to you on like 3 different platforms, and that was all they said about the devlog, so they are really driving this point home. Again, not to sound like an uptight nerd who stalks anything IPL does on social media, but they did also discuss patients lying to you in the 2023 VK post. It is really awesome though to see these earlier ideas fleshed out in present day. One thing that is hinted at is that you are not looking to cure the plague. They say this very briefly when they mention the patients living past 5 hours in the devlog video, but anyone who played Pathologic 2 knows this. Artemy works on the cure, while Daniil works on the prevention, the vaccine. You're not just investigating run-of-the-mill patients, you are investigating patients who have outlived the life expectancy of 5 hours that victims of the plague have. In Pathologic 2, you never really see the full extent of the plague, as its victims are wrapped in cloth. In Pathologic 3, you do not get that luxury. You are examining the physical symptoms in close detail, and I gotta say, it looks incredibly cool. While the day-to-day walking around gameplay footage does not look all that much different from Pathologic 2, the Hospital and 6 sequences are so gruesome, and I can't wait to see the full extent of them. Noted here, the trailer does say that this footage is not reflective of the final product, so I'm sure the day-to-day walking around footage will look a little more polished up when we see it. I personally love Pathologic 2. I have nothing against the game's graphics. From what we see in the trailer, it looks like a unrendered version of Pathologic 2, so I'm hoping that it will look more polished up once we receive it, and I'm pretty sure we will. Anyways, like I stated, you are working on a vaccine. This includes examining patients, documenting their systems and reports, and even going to their house to investigate the way they live, while also verifying their claims. The idea here is that if you can find the thing that patients who have survived longer than 5 hours have in common, you can use that to prevent the plague. I'm not really sure how medicine works. I'm not a doctor, but it sounds correct. One thing the devlog puts emphasis on is, quote-unquote, no amount of common medical knowledge will help. You'll have to learn to read the symptoms of this world and look for the clues beyond the hospital walls. This is such a small part of the log, but I think it highlights the biggest arc for Dankovsky, or one part of his arc. He is a celebrated researcher and doctor, yet all of that experience is for naught when it comes to the sand plague. The plague truly strips all of Dankovsky's fancy titles from him and forces him to rely on his pure intelligence, analyst nature, and wit to solve what's going on. And I don't think his character is given enough credit for essentially going through ego death and still doing what he can to save the town. And that's not even acknowledging how the polyhedron and his thanatology research are all tied up in this. And that is a whole can of worms, but we will not be getting into that today. Before we move on from the hospital piece of the devlog, I want to bring attention to the patient file we see of the dancer. If we look closely at this frame, we see Dr. Dankovsky is looking at a patient on day 3. Day 3 is famous as it is the day the plague arrives to town in Pathologic 2 and Pathologic Classic. We have a really cool looking UI here, where it seems like the complaints and symptoms the patient has reported correlate with some of the diagnoses we have cataloged on the right side of the screen. But we also get a really cool written piece from our patient, and at first I thought this was some sort of evidence about the patient potentially lying, but after some thought, I think there's something more to this woman. It initially baffled me, but we have so much footage of the Broken Heart pub. At first I thought it was because Daniil and the Stomatons are connected via their utopian status, but the Stomatons are not highlighted in this video. And I feel if they were to highlight a location, should it not be the cathedral, the supposed hub of time travel? I think it's more to do with the woman dancing there. I believe the woman who speaks to us in the video log, the woman dancing on stage here, and the patient file we see are all the same person. That can't be an accident. She also refers to her heart as hurting or being affected in the file and in your conversation with her. Since the heart is sort of an important thing in Pathologic 2, specifically for the step aspect, there has to be something more to her. I'm just not quite sure what it is. As I stated before, I haven't played through Classic, and that is one of my biggest blind spots, and I'm planning on doing it soon, but it may be something that we know about from Classic, but I am not immediately aware of it. So we've discussed that this game is different because the playable characters are different, and how that difference in gameplay may look. Also, people are liars, and that sucks, but Daniil is smart, so it's okay. The next portion of the video log shifts to Daniil's reputation with the townspeople. I don't think we're going to have as structured of a reputation mechanic as we did in Pathologic 2, but there will be consequences to his attempts to save the town. We've already seen that the townsfolk's opinion of Daniil may sour, as there is footage of him shooting townsfolk in the clips of footage we got from the audio festival that IPL was featured in. This has a direct effect on his sanity, which I think will be such an important point to discuss, but I will get to it later. What this portion of the devlog highlights is that you will be checking new patients day by day to keep up with how the plague mutates. Every day you will need to develop a new vaccine to combat the way the plague is changing. As the person playing Dankovsky, we know that this is because he is doing his best to save the town. But the townsfolk are not as understanding. All they see is an outsider injecting their sick friends with random substances that could be helping or could be hurting. After listening to this portion of the video log a few times, I think this is what the log is saying. You will have to use sick people's reagents to develop vaccines for the remaining healthy population. Eventually, though, the sick people on that day will either all die off or potentially lie about their diagnoses. Either way, you will lose access to that piece of the puzzle that you need for the vaccine of the day. The next day, when the vaccine mutates, you'll have to do the same thing all over again, except the sick people of the next day are not as lucky. This, combined with the general distrust of you as an outsider, will lead to them attacking you, them being the townsfolk. 8 vaccines will be needed to survive until the 12th day. But every day the townsfolk see their sick friends dying, and you using their sickness to further your research. They do not understand that this is for the good of the town. It's honestly heartbreaking, and I use that word a lot as we discuss some of the narrative themes for Dankovsky later on. But truthfully, he is much softer than people like to believe he is. The fact that his sanity takes a hit when he shoots people should say enough about his character. As much as he pretends that he is above this backwater town, he cares about people and is doing everything in his power to save them. Truthfully, Artemy has it a bit easier. The town is much more accepting of him, and other than involuntarily getting handed the reins of a daycare, he does not have too much responsibility outside of finding a cure. Daniil, though, is managing city resources, ensuring the town stays afloat, and is also attempting to develop a vaccine, while also doing this with the understanding that his life's work may be toast. And if he does not do it perfectly, the town will turn on him for it. Dear God, someone give this man a break. The last bit of the devlog has a pretty big tonal shift to me. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I believe it's because this portion of the video is as if it's from Daniil's line of thought or train of thought, rather than the voiceover narrating his experience through the game. It's like they wanted to include this bit, it just could not figure out how to transition from the parts about the hospital and townsfolk to this portion, so they just kind of stuck it on the end. The end of the devlog describes Daniil as lamenting that he can't just shoot death and save the town from having to deal with it. It mentions a Shabnak, a steppe demon that in the early days people attribute to the killing of Isidore Barak and Simon Kane. But obviously we learn later on that that is not the case. Truthfully, once the plague hits, the townsfolk decide they have bigger fish to fry than the imaginary steppe creature. Anyways, the voiceover mentions that Daniil would rather shoot the plague than fight against the very people he is trying to save. I have so many thoughts about this last piece. Let's start with what we see in this portion. We see a really crazy looking Shabnak demon form while Daniil is just walking around. He is using what I believe to be a plague finder, or the Pathologic 3 version of a plague finder, and he is clicking it in and out of place when the demon appears. I have a couple different theories about what we're seeing here. First is that this is what Daniil sees if his sanity goes too far. Similarly to how we would have to manage being infected in Pathologic 2, if we allow Daniil's sanity to go too far past a point of no return, we could have to manage avoiding the Shabnak demon as we traverse the town. My second theory is as follows. He is using the plague finder here, and when the plague creature appears, he turns it and it goes away. I'm not sure how this will look, but I think when using the plague finder, he'll be able to clearly see signs of the plague. It's almost like putting on a pair of glasses to see certain signs or symbols that were not viewable without the glasses. That being said, I think if he is able to see the trail of clues left by the plague, then the plague will also be able to see him and interact with him, thus the Shabnak demon appearing. This kind of ties into an overarching narrative theme that I've been wanting to discuss. In Pathologic 2, Artemy often has conversations with the plague. It manifests as an executioner and taunts him throughout the game. In a way, the Sandpest to me represents death, and while Artemy has a much more grounded relationship with death, Daniil does not. As we saw in the beginning of the devlog, Daniil is constantly fighting against death. It is his biggest opponent as a thanatologist. He is trying to cure death, and I think when he goes looking for the clues on how to do so, i.e. using the plague finder to find clues about the plague will be able to come for him as well. The plague often taunts Artemy, but because of the different relationships Artemy and Daniil have with death, my theory is that the plague will be much more physically violent towards Daniil, rather than just taunting him like he does Artemy. So when Daniil uses the plague finder to find the plague will be able to find and interact with him as well. These interactions will just be much more violent because Daniil feels much more violently towards death. Anyways, that is what I have gathered from the devlog. I'm still so excited for this game and so interested to see how Daniil's route turns out. I think he's often so mischaracterized, and I think this route will do a lot in terms of character understanding and character development. Before we wrap up though, I do want to go back real quick to the townsfolk turning on Daniil mechanic. This is what is so heartbreaking to me about the devlog being part of the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. In Pathologic 2, Dankovsky appears to be a callous and selfish man. We know after playing that that is not true, but it is how he is characterized to the town. Although he is not focused on curing patients, he is working just as hard as Artemy is to ensure the town's survival. And somehow, mixed up in all of this, is the fact that his life's work on thanatology is at risk as well. Everything he has worked for in helping humanity overcome death is falling apart around him, and people will blame him for it. We've seen so much footage of him having to shoot people, which in turn raises his sanity drastically. I think this sanity mechanic will do a lot to highlight the differences between Artemy and Daniil and their respective relationships with death. I know I'm kind of just restating what I've already said, but in case I did not make it clear enough, I really just wanted to put it out there again. Artemy understands death as a necessary evil, and he gladly uses it as a tool to further his attempts to create a cure. He's probably much more comfortable with the idea of it, as his culture seems to have a very healthy understanding of it. But Dankovsky does not have that in him. His entire life has revolved around preventing death, and now he is having to kill people just to ensure he can live long enough to save a town that does not want him there. Dr. Dankovsky took a Hippocratic oath to do no harm, and this town will force him to break that oath for the sake of his survival. That is heartbreaking. I have such a soft spot for characters who are seen like Dankovsky is. Snake-like even, but are at their core soft and good people. This game is gonna fucking break me. Anyways, that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm so excited for this game, and I really appreciate you guys listening to me ramble about it. Like I said, I have a playlist of other videos I've done documenting what we know about Pathologic 3 so far, as well as the theories that I have about these updates. So if you want to check those out, the playlist will be in the description below, along with all of the sources that I've pulled from for today's video. I also want to thank Make, who is my sounding board for a lot of Pathologic content, as she has a lot more knowledge on the classic side of things and some of the overarching elements. So make sure you go follow her on Twitter for more Pathologic content. I also want to give a big shout out to everyone who subscribed to the Patreon. Your continued support makes videos like this possible, and it means a lot to me. If you're interested in getting early access to YouTube videos, such as my video on horror mechanics that I just released, well, I released it yesterday, but if you're watching this in the future, then it wasn't yesterday. But anyways, the link for that will be in the description below. And if there's any concepts or ideas you'd like to hear more about from Pathologic, feel free to drop them in the description below, and I will do my best. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Peace!